I'm joined, as always, by my fabulous two co-hosts, the injured but smiling Cate Bakos. How are you, Cate?
I'm pretty sore. I'm glad that you're dining out on it and telling our listeners.
Yeah,
Just for transparency, I fell through a rotted timber step at an open for inspection. It was a private inspection, actually, and yeah, it really hurt.
Well,
Spent the afternoon in hospital.
Fell through the floor and an old nail went into you. You damaged your ankle badly.
Yeah.
It's ruining my shtick about all buyers agents do is go to beautiful homes and drive Range Rovers and have lattes. But like, isn't this typical? Two blokes talking about, you know, like an injury, like the compassion and empathy is just dripping off of us. It was actually a pretty bad accident. And we
bad.
And Dave, we should make sure to sort of say to the listeners, we are quite concerned about you. And I saw the video footage, and it was horrific.
The compassion came out prior to us going live on it, Mike. Now it's just
got to give the listeners context.
Yeah, thanks, boys. You know what? I thought I'll text Ian. I won't say because he works away during the week. He's a 2-hour drive to get home. I thought if I ring him and say I've really hurt myself, and he comes home and it's not broken, he's going to think I'm a sook and he'll be really hacked off with me. So I texted him. He's like, wow, that sounds bad. Are you getting it checked out? Yes, I am. I think I might have broken something. He said, highly unlikely. Ankles don't break very often. I'm like, okay. So then I got it patched up and sent him a couple of pics. And he said, yeah, it looks terrible. I'll see you Friday.
There you go.
I caught an Uber to the hospital.
Oh, no. So as it turns out, Dave, you and I are quite compassionate compared to Ian's response.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Tough love.
How are you, Mike? How's your week been?
I'm uninjured, mate.
Uninjured?
You're good.
I'm good to go. I'm doing a charity event tomorrow night with the first ever African wearer of the yellow jersey in the Tour de France, and Mike Tomalaris, the voice of the Tour de France on SBS over the last 15 or so years. So I'm excited by that. I'm a bit of a cycling nerd.
Yeah,
so good.
That's right. So, and you still cycling or?
I cycle once a year in a charity event. The next one's in about 90 days. I've done one ride so far, so it's a bit of an uphill battle.
No pun intended.
No, I used to. I'm a retired amateur triathlete. So, you know, I raced for Australia once 10 years ago. So I've got some sort of talent innate, hopefully deep down, that'll come out on the day.
Well, enjoy your charity night and good luck in 3 months' time with your ride. So today's episode is all about settlement day, what to expect and what can go wrong. It can be a real nervous time for a lot of purchasers, most purchasers really, and there are a surprising number of things that can derail settling on time if we're not on top of our game. So we're going to unpack that today for our listeners. So first question I have for you, Cate, is, well, let's start with, what is settlement?
Yeah, settlement is where a transfer of ownership of a property occurs, and it passes from the vendor to the purchaser, and all of the paperwork, all of the payment is finalised, and a new name is on the title.
Yes, so you become the official owner of another property or your first property.
That's right. And we refer to settlement periods or settlement dates in different states a little bit differently. And we have typical settlement periods. In Victoria, 30, 60, 90, even 120 are considered the norm. But the reality is, subject to the vendor agreeing, you can have any particular date you want. Sometimes someone says to me, oh, you know, I'd like to move on Thursday the 17th of whatever. So everything is adjustable as well. If you have a 90-day settlement, and then for whatever reason you're ready to settle earlier and the vendor would prefer to settle earlier, you can change your date. So settlement isn't as fixed and as
no.
Yeah, it can be moved.
It is negotiable, isn't it? It's one of the many pieces of the property purchasing puzzle that can be negotiated that a lot of people don't realise. And so, Mike, who normally coordinates settlement?
Well, you should normally have a solicitor or a conveyancer on your team. So as a purchaser, obviously you'll need somebody. As a vendor, you'll need the solicitor to draw up the contract before it goes on the market. I remember back from my New South Wales real estate training is that you physically couldn't market a property for sale unless the contract was in the office of the real estate agency. Not sure exactly whether that's changed, but of course you need to get it up front, so you should always have a solicitor. Now, if you're buying a property, you certainly can do the work yourself. But it's kind of like, I always say to people, give me a scalpel and YouTube, and I reckon I can sort that little, day surgery issue that you've got, or, and I've done some successful things from YouTube. I've built fences and that sort of stuff. It's a great resource. But when it comes to conveyancing, we're talking about the transfer of, an asset worth at the very least hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you can do it. You can do your own research if you want control over the process. But I really, really wouldn't recommend it. There's a lot of risks that are involved in it, and you'll need to understand the legislation as distinct to your particular area, and there are all sorts of little caveats and things about the property itself that need to be accounted for. I mean, conveyancers need to be licensed, or they need to be a solicitor that's actually a legal practitioner. So the right qualifications and experience are really, really important. And I think in the rest of this conversation, we'll talk about some of the things that can go wrong, which hopefully sort of ties a nice, neat bow around my sort of summary. That is, pay for the expert. It's too risky to do it for yourself, unless perhaps you're already a barrister. But even then, you're probably better off spending your time somewhere else.
Yeah, nicely said, Mike, because there are a lot of things that we can do if we choose to. I remember thinking I could save money and do my own floor sanding. It's one of the most backbreaking, horrible jobs you can do. And if you don't do it really well, it sort of looks pretty average. But you've got to ask yourself, what's the best use of my time? Am I better off doing what I do really well and paying a floor sander? 100%.
Yeah. And for a lot of people who make money in their career and they are probably worth a reasonable amount per hour, then that's an obvious thing. Like, should I spend hours and hours in doing this, or could I do some extra work and make that money? Or do I actually need the time to kind of rest? So with my 50, 60 hour a week high powered job, do I really want to tack on, hours and hours of this conveyancing work? And for other people that, let's say they're on a smaller income or they have more spare time, then it's more about the risks. What if you get it wrong? It gets very, very serious. I mean, we've been involved in a matter where the property had settled and the property didn't actually have an occupation certificate, and there was talk about it being subject to a demolition order. So like things like that can happen, and that would be a horrific result for somebody.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think selecting a high quality conveyancer or solicitor is well worth the money spent, and I wouldn't even be looking at going for the cheapest one around. Lots of things can go wrong, and particularly if you're purchasing a strata property with a strata body linked to it, there's lots of details in the minutes, and lots of different, the history of what's been spent, what's expected to be spent on the property into the future. So select a good solicitor or conveyancer. No point trying to save an extra $500 or $1,000 there, only for it to cost you big time down the track.
Dave, I completely agree with you. We've met many conveyancers and solicitors along the way. Obviously, we've got our faves that we refer business to if the client needs us to do so. And we get clients with their own preference, or they go shopping for the cheapest. And I just think to myself, my goodness, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and you're trying to save $300. And I've had situations where we can't reach the conveyancer. They're not picking up their phone, and it might be a landline, and that's all we've got. Or they've got a Big Pond or a Gmail address, and they're not available for their client. They're not able to understand or work through any of the issues that we're uncovering. It's quite nightmarish if you've got a really cheap solicitor or conveyancer. And a lot of people look at the cost of a conveyancer incorrectly as well. It's easier to put the headline rate up, and I've seen flashing neon signs with $499, and the reality is that you have to add GST and disbursements to that. Now, disbursements we'll talk about, but there's some of the certificates that need to be ordered that you can't settle without. And so if you're getting quoted a base rate that doesn't include GST and disbursements, it's like looking at lending rates and not taking into account the comparison rate. It's easier to be quoted the honeymoon and not the extra required bolt-ons. Well, it happens very quickly. That's the first thing I'll say. And it's always a little bit of mystique around settlement. Clients will say to me, do I need to be there on the day? Do I need to do anything in particular? And the reality is that it only takes 5, 10, 15 minutes max for a smooth settlement to go through. And the parties that are involved are obviously the lenders on both sides. And if there's lending, you've also got the legal representatives of each party as well. And these days they do it online. They used to do it in settlements offices. So you'd have solicitors or conveyancers meeting each other, holding checks and using checklists and signing everything off. But these days it happens online in a system called PEXA. And provided everything is correct in the system and the money is where it's meant to be. So in other words, as a purchaser, you'll have already paid your deposit. That will likely be with the agency trust account, but there'll be a residual that still needs to be paid, the funds to complete, and they might need you to prepare checks, but usually they need you to have it sitting in a particular account that they've got access to, and they can easily move those funds across so that all parties are squared off, and then things are digitally signed. And then you'll get the phone call saying settlement's gone through. It's surprising just how quickly it happens and how little fanfare there is around it.
Yeah, times have changed since I remember working at lending services at National Australia Bank back in the mid-90s and walking the checks down to another lender to complete settlement and making sure the right amounts were on the checks. So things have come a long way since then.
Yeah.
And what is an ideal settlement day?
Wow.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, ideal means that it all goes through at the time that we were told it would go through. So, for example, we might be told settlement today is at 11:30. Now, settlements usually run between about 10 o'clock in the morning and typically 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but I've had settlements as late as 6 o'clock. You just need the parties to agree to be on the system and to do it. But let's say we're told up front, maybe 48 hours prior, settlement will be on Thursday at 11:30. Well, an ideal settlement day is when we get the phone call at 11:45 saying, tell your client congratulations, they can go and get the keys. A not so ideal one is when you have delays or issues, which we will talk about. But if we have an ideal settlement day, you assume that the purchaser will go down to the real estate agent's office, pick up their keys, they'll get a little hamper, maybe a bottle of champers, and they'll have the truck ready and waiting, and then they'll be able to move in. Or they'll go and check out their property and give it a good clean, maybe sleep the night on their camp bed. People celebrate and take the keys and move in all different ways. Having the truck ready on settlement day carries a little bit of risk though, because you're paying for a truck driver and you've got a removalist that has a schedule. That's you taking a punt that your settlement will go through smoothly and on schedule. They generally do, but if I was hazarding a guess, I'd say 10% might be slightly delayed. And in my experience, 1 or 2% might have a full day delay. I've only ever had one settlement be delayed for several weeks, and that was because the client didn't organise their finance.
Yeah, well, it doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So it's something to be aware of, that's for sure. Yeah. So you've touched on some of the aspects, but what are some more of the steps and paperwork that needs to be in order for settlement to happen?
Yeah, when you first purchase a property and your solicitor or conveyancer gets your contract of sale, they high-five you, they'll quickly send you a few forms to sign. One might be a formal engagement form to give them confidence that they're representing you, but they'll also have transfer of land forms, and this varies in different states and territories, but that's you signing a form that states that you're taking ownership of that property on settlement day, and it all goes onto your mortgage and your title documentation. funds to complete will need to be in the right account. It could be in the lawyer's trust account. It could be in your account and you're getting checks. We've talked about that before. Loan documentation has to be certified. So once the bank has formally approved your loan, they'll send you the documents to sign. A lot do hard copy, some of them do electronic. And certification requires someone at the bank in the certifications team going through and making sure that everything is in order. The forms were right, they've been correctly signed, there's nothing that could hold up settlement day. And then obviously we have a pre-settlement inspection, usually about 7 to 10 days prior to settlement. Sometimes people do it on the very last day before settlement. And what you're looking for is that nothing's been damaged or changed since you've purchased the property. So you expect the property to be like it was on the day of sale. If there are issues, if something's not working, something's missing, there's junk still there, whatever it might be, you need to run that through your solicitor so that it can be sorted out. Sometimes the vendor will quickly see to things and repair or take away junk. Other times there might be things that are no longer operational, and we might coordinate some money to come off at settlement. So it could be literally just a transfer in favour of the purchaser, or they might be giving you cash, whatever it could be. That's usually something that has to be sorted out before settlement. And obviously, once you've seen to all of those things, settlement should take place because everything's lodged on PEXA and all parties agree that they're good to go.
Have you guys ever seen some of the dodgy stuff that happens with settlement? It's a bit like, when you're buying a car, you put down, I paid 10 grand for it, but it was actually 60 grand, but you and the purchaser had a bit of a deal. I've seen people bundle in things like boats. I've heard stories about people putting boats in because obviously that can impact the stamp duty. So it's like a lesser amount plus a boat that's just kind of like a little backhand thing. I know that is naughty and it's illegal.
Yeah, it is naughty. It's dodgy. Look,
I've that sort of stuff. Have you guys seen that happen?
Yeah, I mean, you often have people, not often enough over the years, someone will raise something like that. We're buying off a related party. We're going to try and reduce the purchase price so we pay less stamp duty. But there's always it's going to cost them on. First of all, it's illegal.
Yeah. This is not financial advice.
Yeah. Second of all, often they need to, they then want to borrow against the purchase price that it's worth. They just don't want to pay that purchase price.
Yeah.
So it's well, I mean, you are required to pay, if it's from a related party, market rates. So you then pay stamp duty. So look, we're not here to tell you what the market rates are, but almost certainly if you pay a lower value price for the property than it's potentially worth, and that's what's agreed upon on the signed contract of sale, well, that's what the bank's going to value it at. So you're going to be having to borrow less money. And, often just when someone raises that sort of conversation, that derails it right there. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think when people actually do something like that they shouldn't really do, we probably aren't told.
Yeah. I don't want to touch stuff like that. You do hear stories, and I hear people's creative ideas as well. At the end of the day, stamp duty's there for a reason, and if you're trying to dodge any kind of duty or tax, there could be a really ugly spotlight. I've certainly seen developers retaining their asking price and offering a cash rebate, but that's mentioned in the contract. The lender can see it, everyone can see it. I'm always surprised that the SRO doesn't have an issue with that. And I've also seen offers of televisions and furniture and all kinds of goodies in apartments, but I don't typically buy brand new, and I certainly don't get excited about behaviour like that.
There's one development, and even though I like to think I'm a clever property brain, but it was an off-the-plan apartment thing, and it came with a Maserati, and I was sort of like, come on, remember that, you're paying for the Maserati somewhere. It's not a free Maserati.
Aimed at consumers like you, Mike.
Got me in a little weak spot.
and then those people are surprised when the valuations come in short.
Yeah.
They've been refunded $50,000. Oh, my valuation's $50,000 short. What a surprise. oh, the Maserati's worth $200,000.
Yeah, but when you hear that V8 in your ear, like, does it any of that even matter, Dave? That's the real question.
Look, I'm not really a car man, Mike, so it doesn't impact.
So yes, I'll take it as a yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're on to, why would a buyer want a short settlement?
Well, for various reasons. A lot of people assume that a vendor wants a short settlement. So buyers sometimes throw out a sharp, shrewd offer and think that they're making it more attractive with a short settlement offer. That's assuming that a vendor is in financial strife and they need to get rid of it quickly. Not every vendor is in that position. And even those that could be wanting to know that they've got a deal still need time to find their next home. So, that's one typical reason. A buyer might want a short settlement because they've sold and they need a roof over their head within a really short time frame. I've also dealt with people that have other short time frame issues, such as a pending birth of a child. They could have a financial deadline that requires a settlement by a certain date. So I remember recently I was working with someone in the military and they had to purchase by the end of the year to be eligible for whatever the offering was within the military. And so I had to move really quickly and it had to be a short settlement because they had to be settled. So all kinds of reasons exist for short settlements, but typically I'm very nervous if someone wants shorter than 30 days unless I've got their broker or lender saying there's no problem.
So a typical settlement is around about 6 weeks, right? And you could probably have a settlement date as far out as you like, right? If both parties agree to it. And
I had a settlement of 365 days with the option to add up to an extra 180 when I first bought my property. And the reason I did that was I really wanted that particular house and it was an off-market purchase and the vendor was older and unwell and she just did not want to be rushed. And so in the end, we became pretty good friends and we're still very good friends, and she needed time to find the right property. And we ended up doing it within the year, but it was a really unusual settlement.
And the interesting thing about extended settlement periods or short settlement periods, but perhaps focusing on extended, if the market is appreciating during that time, you could be settling for last year's price on something that's, 10, 15% more expensive, right? But it also works kind of the other way. It's a bit like if you're putting a deposit down to buy something off the plan, you kind of, it's up to the gods as to what it's going to be worth in 18 months when maybe you settle.
Well, the only thing that I'll say in favour of an established property in a long settlement versus off the plan, Mike, is if you, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when you've got a contract of sale, even if it's a very long settlement, the bank will conduct the valuation and they'll give you formal approval. Whereas if you've bought off the plan, they will not do the valuation generally and give you formal until you're ready to settle, until the titles are available and the property's ready to settle.
Yeah, that's right. So you actually never really know the settlement date for the off the plans, and often they're delayed. Often they settle later than expected, and then you only get the sort of 2 weeks or 10 days notice to then make everything happen once the titles are in order. So there can be a big rush at the end of the process with an off the plan purchase, which makes it sort of a tighter squeeze. So often you just make sure you're ready well ahead of time. Also with like a longer settlement period, often banks, like loan documents, are only viable for generally 90 days. It might be sometimes 60 days. So if you get to formal approval, but your settlement period is not for another, 90 days or whatever's longer than those loan documents, and that formal approval actually lasts, then you potentially need to get another approval done again. But if you've got a switched on strategic mortgage broker, they'll be aware of that. But it does also mean you might be delaying getting formal approval, which could put at risk your ability to actually get approved if the marketplace changes, rates go up, serviceability changes, your financial circumstances change. So there are some risks around longer settlement periods as well, such as that. Another reason people will look for a shorter settlement period is often that can help with the negotiation particularly if the people who are selling have already purchased. Often, they'll choose or need a shorter settlement period because of that. So it can help with the negotiation, and obviously vice versa. If you've already sold your property and you need to buy in a hurry and settle simultaneously, which is often the case for anyone upgrading, that they're striving to settle simultaneously.
I think it's really important to ask the agent what the favoured settlement period is before you assume. A lot of people assume incorrectly, and I've seen buyers going with really short settlement offers, and I've just asked the agent, what would the vendor prefer? Actually, Kate, they'd love a longer settlement. They haven't bought yet. So without asking that vital question, you could be giving yourself a bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, 100%. You should always ask that question and find out, because you can be giving yourself an advantage as well by making sure you settle to suit the vendor, or even, as I just mentioned, sometimes they'd really love to settle sooner. So that could help you get your negotiation over the line faster, and maybe even for a lesser price, or if there's two of you around the same mark, sometimes they'll even choose the person who's able to settle faster.
Yeah.
How quick could it be done? I remember somebody telling me, this is maybe 15 or 20 years ago, that if everyone is on the same page and the banks are motivated and all the certificates are all at the right time, it can almost be done in like 7 to 10 days. But like, that's not a reality because these things are scheduled. But if it was a race, how quick could it be done?
I think it could be.
Yeah, it could be done in 7 days. I'd say 2 weeks isn't out of the question. If it's fully approved and everyone's ready to go, I think you could settle in 2 weeks.
My very fastest settlement that I've personally done, and it had to be quick to appeal to the vendor with the nasty price that I offered, was 12 business days. And I remember Ian saying, I hope you know what you're doing. But it happened.
Yeah, I think we've settled some in 1 to 2 weeks from approval date. So not necessarily from purchase date, but from approval date, we've been able to turn it around in 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's probably where the approval's dragged out a little longer for whatever reason.
This could be a real good charity fundraiser, since I'm going to this charity fundraiser, a conveyancing race. So if you are a conveyancer or solicitor and you'd like to submit your application to win the Property Trio conveyancing race, then get in touch.
Tell us.
It's not a prize that anyone wants to partake in, Mike. It's a really bad prize. It's just full of stress.
Well, because there's risks in things being missed as well, right? And I think that's probably the obvious next step is in this this episode is what can go wrong. And you guys have probably seen a lot more than me in this, because I tend to do my job after things have been purchased, so I don't have to worry about it. People just give me something that they've bought and say, give it a good whack for depreciation deductions. But what are some of the horror stories you guys have seen? I'm really interested.
Oh, wow. Where do we start?
Lots. Seen heaps.
Yeah. So,
go for it.
Delays stress everyone, but the question of delay is, how long can you delay settlement and have the vendor feeling comfortable enough to give you that little bit of space to pull it together before they start to doubt your intent or ability to settle. And when that day comes, they can obviously issue a default, or they can serve a rescission notice. That's another term for the default notice. And what that means is you put on notice that you've got only a certain number of days to settle. Otherwise, they'll keep your deposit. This is worst case scenario. They keep your deposit, they resell the property, you pay for any additional costs associated with reselling the property, including marketing. And if they sell to someone else and the best price that they can get is less than what you had agreed to, they can also sue you for the difference.
Ouch.
Yeah. And look, generally what happens is if you settle late, you're up for daily interest costs, which are built into the contract, and it's worth just understanding what those interest costs are. Ideally, I look at a good strategic mortgage broker and their team plays a big role in ensuring settlement occurs on time.
Yep.
I mean, I know our team are off at, pretty much every time. We're making sure the bank's ready to go. We're making sure, PEXA is ready to go. We're liaising with the solicitors. It's amazing how often just little things are missed by one of the various parties along the way. So, some of the things that can cause delays is, well, if finance is not in place, that certainly will cause a delay often. So, always try and get pre-approval before you actually purchase. There can be delays in fund transfers from other accounts or equity releases. So what we mean by that is you need to get all the money of all your own cash into a bank account with your new lender that is required to complete settlement on the day of settlement. So most people, will have a loan, they'll have paid their deposit, but then they'll have other money of their own that they'll need to come up with. So like, for example, recently we had a client, we found out on the day of settlement that the client had a $5,000 transfer limit on their nominated shortfall account. And that meant that bank was unable to debit the $180,000 of funds to complete settlement. So the client then had to quickly call the bank and increase the transfer limit so settlement could proceed. So, there can be little things like that take place if you're not fully prepared. So in that case, the nominated account to complete settlement, the transfer limit wasn't high enough. So, that's one little tip for our listeners for when they're looking to settle. Yeah. Some other examples are lost documentation, which happens often, incorrect documentation that the bank's certification team has missed. So what happens in the process is when you send your signed loan documents back, member of the bank certification team will check through all the documents when they are first received to tick off that they've got everything. Now, they often, at the end of the day, the reality is you've probably got someone not that far out of university ticking off a checklist, making sure the documents are there. Sometimes they miss things. And then there's another review of these documents just the day before settlement or sometimes the morning of settlement. And so often things come up that morning. There's just one document missing a signature. There's a contract that wasn't signed and or nominee when it should have been. One that comes up often is there's actually, particularly with units, with an accessory unit or car park on title, they often have two titles, but only one of the titles was noted on the mortgage documents. So now the mortgage documents need to be reprinted. The second title needs to be placed on the documents. So these are the sort of things that, the solicitor should be aware of if you have a good one, and again, why you don't shortcut on a solicitor. So look, there's a few examples of some of the things that can go wrong as well.
Lost titles. You'd be surprised how many
lost titles.
You have a parent going guarantor, and all of a sudden there's a mad scramble for a title that's in some bank vault, or it's been paid off. It can be quite problematic.
Yeah, look, often the title didn't come from the last bank to the current bank when they refinanced, for example. So it's in the storage facility of not even the current bank. It's the ex-bank prior to that wasn't picked up. So we've actually got a unique one at the moment. So a tip, if you're buying from a deceased estate, ensure the probate has been granted. So at the moment, some clients of ours have had a delay in settlement that they don't know how long it's going to take because the probate hasn't even been granted yet. So they've actually sold their property, had to move out. They've had to now find another place to live in, and they can't move into the property they purchased because the probate hasn't been granted. So that's one to look out for. They've had to find temporary accommodation.
Yeah, it's challenging. I've had situations where things like that have come up and we've been able to do a deal with the vendor or the representatives of the estate of the vendor and get a license agreement, which is essentially like a very short-term lease. And it's at an agreed rate, and you pay your insurances up front, and you make sure that you've satisfied your pre-settlement inspection details, and you take the keys and you move in, and you're essentially renting that property until your settlement date rolls around. And it takes a lot of trust, but often that's a workaround.
Yeah, and I guess we don't know what's going on behind the scenes to cause the delay of the probate being granted. So maybe that is more difficult because different parties involved in this situation.
Yes.
But yeah, like trying to negotiate to get into the house at least. And often, the vendors will be kind enough to allow that kind of thing to happen, won't they, Kate?
Typically. And, I say to people, there's a lot of weight on how smooth the transaction's been and how the vendors feel about you. It doesn't mean that you're a pushover and you pay a premium for the property, but it means that the deal was respectful or the auction day was respectful. You might have got to meet the vendors. There's a lot of merit in meeting the vendor if you're a purchaser. Shake the hand, put on a smile, because you never know what you'll need on settlement day. And it goes both ways. They might need you to be comfortable to push out settlement by a few hours or a day, or they might be asking you to let them take something precious from the property. And it definitely pays to be on good terms, because difficulties like we've been discussing can be smoothed right over if there's a feeling of goodwill there.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes you just need to be willing to ask the question, don't you, and communicate with the other side. When we had another one recently, again, a deceased estate, and the final inspection, the pre-inspection, final inspection was delayed. There were 3 adult children who each had furniture and things that needed to be removed from the house, and it seemed one of the children was out of the loop and didn't actually remove their furniture and all the things. Their goods were still in there when the pre-inspection occurred. So in that instance, settlement was delayed by a week. So,
Wow.
so like one of the children probably had made other plans. Who knows? They were away on holidays. They might have been overseas and they hadn't got everything out of the house.
Yeah. Wow. Dave, there's a few other things that that are on the list of, what causes delays, and you've talked about quite a few. Tardy purchases or vendors or legal reps when it comes to paperwork. And I say this because you'll be sent a package of things to sign and go through when you first purchase. I remember when I was young, I once put it on the fridge and thought, yeah, settlement's ages away, I'll do it when I feel like it. And I was getting some urgent phone calls, and I think I must have created a bit of stress for those legal reps that were supporting me, because I should have done it straight away and turned it around. So that's one other cause of delay.
That's a big one. I think like all the way through, and particularly obviously dealing with the finance, get your paperwork back to whoever needs the paperwork from you as quickly
straight
as you
away.
can.
Totally. Another one, sadly, I've come up against this quite a lot, is a death of a party on the contract. So between sale and settlement, someone's passed away, and it means that documentation all has to change. So, that's a terrible one. But when you're dealing with, elderly or unwell vendors, this can strike. A late subdivision issue is a common one, and it's more common than people realise. If you go and buy a brand new townhouse, or even a townhouse that isn't brand new, but the owner, the builder, has retained them all, and then a few years down the track they've decided to sell them or to sell one, they may not have applied to the titles office to subdivide that property and to issue a fresh title for the one that you're buying. And so you're purchasing that technically off the plan. And people assume that off the plan means it doesn't exist and it's being built. But that's not the case at all. And the same can apply to a house on a big block, and they've subdivided the backyard, or they're in the process of subdividing the backyard and they've built a unit at the back. So you're purchasing the old house at the front, but its title's not the same anymore. It's going to be on a smaller title, and it might have a shared driveway. And so the plan of subdivision is still yet to come through. A lot of people assume that just because the agent says it should be right for 60 days or 90 days that it will be, and that's not the case. They can be quite delayed. I've had one that was delayed by 6 months. So that's something to bear in mind. And if you're looking at an off-the-plan property and you're thinking of changing a job, or your circumstances are about to change, you really need to seek some advice and think carefully about that. Another thing that can delay settlement is a caveat. So if someone's placed a caveat on a property can't settle until the caveat's removed. Sometimes it's just a process where a caveat is placed to protect the vendor's interest, but other times it might be because you've got vendors that have separated and one party hasn't considered that they've had a good financial settlement with the partner yet, and there could be a caveat that represents an argument. So you need to understand what a caveat is all about. Another one is serious damage to the property during the settlement period. So your pre-settlement inspection picks up some issues, and you're saying to to your legal rep, I can't settle with a property like this. It needs to be fixed or resolved. And if you've got a right to hold up settlement, then that can definitely lead to a delay. And lastly, I've got a note here, arguments about the validity of the contract. So, for example, a defective contract. If the vendor hasn't been honest about the property and there's details that are missing or there's incorrect details, that can potentially make the contract defective, and the purchaser might have a right to walk away. But in a lot of cases, when you've got that argument brewing, they'll want to resolve it, and it can delay settlement.
So there's lots of things that can go wrong, basically, for our listeners to be aware of. And so as we come to towards the end of this episode, what happens if the purchaser is at fault and can't give the vendor confidence that they can settle? You probably touched on a couple of these things already.
Yeah, I did. Look, in most cases, if there's been a good relationship with the agent, or if the vendor is being reasonable, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll charge you those fees and penalties. They might be okay to give you a few days to sort things out. But the worst case scenario is that you lose your deposit, you lose the property, and you could be sued for any losses or all losses.
Yeah, and look, in the opposite instance, if you're not able to settle on time, and you feel like the delay isn't your fault, but technically any delay in settlement, the purchaser is supposed to pay penalty interest to the vendor, you should question and challenge that, and speak to the relevant parties that support you in the settlement process to see if you can get out of having to pay those fees. Or so often, for example, we'll actually try, we'll find a reason why the bank's at fault.
Absolutely. And the
so
bank pays the penalties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'll get the bank to pay the penalty instead of our client. So if we assume settlement goes to plan, I might touch on some of the next steps. So, or Kate, do you want to touch on a few of them, and then I'll share some as well?
Yeah, so obviously all parties are notified, including the agency, and then you can go and get your keys in your hamper. If the agents don't know that the property is settled, they won't release the keys, so it's good to make that quick phone call.
Yeah, so removal trucks can then be delivered, can then deliver the goods. So locks can be changed. I know. Don't expect your removalist to turn up on time necessarily. We've certainly moved into one house about 16, 17 years ago, and we were going to a gig that night at the Forum in Melbourne. And
you didn't go to the gig, did you?
We got to the gig, but I did as much carrying as the removalist, so I was very sore the next day. And the electricity wasn't on, so it was towards the end, it was in the dark.
Sounds like total joy.
Yeah, I was sore at the concert. So some of the things we recommend to our clients is check your loan details and banking is set up correctly. So, for example, make sure your direct debit is in place for your repayments. Make sure your offset account's linked. We'll probably get a few instances each year where someone realises months or even years down the track they've had all this money sitting in an offset and it hasn't been reducing their interest. And then we need to invest time, obviously, in chasing up the bank to refund the interest that they haven't, interest savings they haven't received. So that's a big one. Obviously important, even more important if you have multiple offsets linked to the loan. Making sure that the loan repayments will come out of the correct bank account. Now, your strategic mortgage broker should be onto all of these things, but it's still worth double checking. All your direct debits are set up for your utilities, etc. If you change lender, you should double check the settlement disbursements are accurate. You've paid the correct money for stamp duty, transfer fees, solicitor, the adjustments. The shortfall that's deducted is accurate, and request explanations if you're unsure that it is accurate from your solicitor and mortgage broker if anything doesn't make sense. I think also, enlist the services of a quantity surveyor if you've bought an investment property to draft a depreciation schedule. You should make sure all your insurances are taken out that are relevant: landlords, building, contents insurance, Have you organised a property manager to find a tenant? Ideally you've got that going prior to settlement. Do you have adequate personal risk insurance in place if your income was to be significantly reduced, or worse, a spouse was unable to work at all? Have you notified all important parties? Have you changed an address? Have you organised your mail to be redirected until you're certain that you've got all your change of addresses organised? Are all your amenities connected in time? And making sure you've cancelled them all at your old address. So there's some of the things we put on the checklist for our clients to go through.
That's a really good list, and it's a bit of a segue into the last little section. I've noted a few things mistakes that people make that are associated with settlement, and a couple of key ones is forgetting adjustments. Now, you mentioned adjustments, Dave, but to shed light on what that means, if you're buying a property and the vendor has just paid let's say their council rates and their water rates, well, then you're getting the benefit of that payment because they've paid a year in advance. So that will be adjusted. They'll use a pro rata calculation, and you need to make sure that you've got some spare money for things like that, for adjustments. And it could be also for owners' corporation fees or strata fees. So that's the first thing I'll say. And the other one that I see people getting wrong is not advising their legal reps about any grants or benefits that they're reliant on, because not everyone uses a great strategic mortgage broker who's all over it and gets the paperwork sorted for the stamp duty concession or the grants or whatever deal the buyer has going with a government initiative. And it can be too late if you've left it to the last minute. You get your adjustments and your funds to complete statement, and you're thinking, my goodness, who's paying this $40,000? Well, you didn't tell your conveyancer about it. So it's really important that you do at the onset. And the last one is just making sure that you don't book your removals truck for 9 a.m. or 7 a.m. on settlement day, because most settlements don't really start to happen until after 10, and some happen at the end of the day.
Yeah, they're really good examples. So the team gave me another example of client calling up really stressed, saying they got a phone call from PEXA or their solicitor that they had $30,000 shortfall on settlement. But it was as simple as PEXA, and then the solicitor hadn't realised it was simply the fees deducted from the loan amount. So their loan amount was, call it $400,000, and they were being told they only had $370,000. But there was the stamp duty, transfer of land, mortgage registration, mortgage discharge, title search fee that added up to that $30,000. So if everyone's on the ball, you don't have to have these stresses, but you'll be surprised how just how many little things can go, or even just one little thing can go wrong or be misunderstood, and it can cause quite a panic.
It can indeed.
All right. Well, hopefully that's been really useful for all our listeners as they come up to their next property settlement, and they'll be able to use this episode as a bit of a checklist for them to make sure they get things right. So without further ado, let's move into our gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
My gold nugget is to not do it yourself and book the truck for the day after settlement, because it's all very good to be excited, but, you need that order on the agent to release the keys. The camp mattress, that's a bit of fun. What a great way to start the journeys, to not worry about the moving in, go there, have a champagne, sleep on the floor and start tomorrow.
My gold nugget is to make sure you've got a really good checklist. And if you don't have a checklist and you can't find one online, give us a shout. We can certainly sort that out and send something over. So listeners, if you do want to reach out for a checklist, just give us a yell.
Give us a yell, and we might say we can put in show notes as well. Awesome. All right. Well, have a great week, everyone. Good luck at your awards this week, Kate.
Thanks, Dave. In my flats. Yeah.
Hopefully you can still get up onto stage with that injured ankle.
Yeah.
And enjoy your charity night, Mike. It sounds like it'll be a great night.
Thank you. See you
next week.
Next
week.
See you next week, everyone.
Bye.